Hi, I'm Tom Estrin, and this is the award-winning Power in Politics podcast. Today we speak with Antonio Delgado, the lieutenant governor who's now running for governor against Governor Kathy Hochul in the upcoming gubernatorial election next year. We speak to him on the heels of his rally. He joined other lawmakers and advocates down in New York City earlier this week, calling for a special session so the New York State Legislature would address some of the federal budget cuts as a part of the reconciliation plan that was just passed. We talked to him about that. We also talked to him to the news of the day when it comes to the Public Service Commission approving rate hikes for National Grid along with Central Hudson. We also get into the Donald Trump takeover of Washington, D.C. and New York and maybe some similarities he might see there when it comes to that. We also get into gerrymandering, redistricting, and his perspective on that. Thanks as always for joining us. We appreciate it. You can download Power in Politics wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe today or watch us on YouTube at CBS 6 Albany. Antonio Delgado, thanks for joining us here tonight. Really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man these days.
Thank you for having me.
All right, before we get to the special session and you calling for that, of course, down in New York City yesterday, we do have news of the day. I do want you to address in regards to the Public Service Commission approving those rate hikes for National Grid along with Central Hudson. What is your reaction to that?
It's a travesty. You know, ever since I got involved in focusing on the issue around affordability and talk to folks across this state about utilities, the fact that we are going to continue to allow monopolies without any type of oversight, without any type of accountability to rein in their costs at all, knowing that we have people who are hurting every single day, we have a responsibility in New York to lead in this regard. And it is long past overdue for us to have legislation that actually ties that rate of return to something that doesn't allow the monopolies to just drive up the profit at the expense of the people. And so as a leader, we need folks to step up and actually pass legislation that would address this in a meaningful way.
Does that include any changes to the Public Service Commission? I know that some Democrats in your party have called to replace the entity entirely.
I think we should definitely consider what more we can do to rein in the monopolies, whether that means give more power and authority to other agencies to do that oversight, whether that means limiting again or capping what the rate of return ought to be, or tying it to a standard that would actually limit how much they're able to jack up these prices. But the fact of the matter is, it is hurting New Yorkers everywhere, and it is long overdue for us to take bold and decisive action.
All right, let's get to the special session you were calling for, of course, yesterday in those rallies in New York City. There also was one at the Capitol in Albany. You've said there's resources and capabilities for the state to address these federal funding cuts. So I ask you, what are those resources? What are those capabilities the state has to address this at this time? Because many officials have said, well, we can't backfill these.
Well, there's a difference between saying we can't backfill entirely and we can backfill to some extent. We can do whatever we can to mitigate the economic harm that we know is coming to New Yorkers all across this state. We know that we have to take steps to mitigate this harm, and we can do that one very key way, which is to raise revenue from the ultra wealthy and big corporations. That is a critical way. We have the resources, we have the means, we have the most billionaires anywhere in the world, most millionaires anywhere in the world. We are in a position, given the amount of wealth inequality that we have in our state, the largest wealth inequality gap in the country, given how many folks that we know are already living in poverty, with 1 in 5 children growing up poor and half those kids in deep poverty, there is an opportunity here for shared sacrifice and to make sure that those with a lot pay more in and help us offset the economic harm that we know so many folks are going to experience. And it's not just, I want to be clear, about attempting to mitigate that economic pain and that economic harm. It's also about passing legislation to protect our immigrant community that has been targeted and will be continued to be targeted by the increased spending that is in this big, ugly bill that the Republicans passed in Washington. Billions of dollars in increased spending for ICE, while literally cutting spending for the social safety net. Those two factors are things that we here in New York need to be addressing immediately.
I mean, New York for All has been pretty controversial at that in terms of getting any headway in the legislature. Do you support it? I guess what makes you think that that could pass in a special session, mind you?
What I support, yes, is New York for All. But beyond supporting the bill, what I support is making the effort to do everything we can to demonstrate to New Yorkers that we actually are going to fight. You know, before the bill passed in DC, you heard a lot of folks say, please call your congressperson. Please do whatever you can to raise and ring the alarm around this bill and the travesty that it is. And once the bill passed, what happened to the action? What happened to the urgency? What happened to the desire to make sure that folks all across our state, from urban to rural, to our hospitals, to those who rely on grant dollars, to our veterans, to those who rely on SNAP and Medicaid, we're talking billions and billions of dollars that are going to be implicated. And we're already losing money this fiscal year. And so we should be already back thinking about how to deal with this now. Because at the end of the day, if we're not willing to show that kind of urgency, if we're not willing to actually roll our sleeves up and get back to work, then all of the rhetoric, all of the hysteria that was communicated before the bill passed rings a little bit hollow.
When it comes, though, to taxing the rich, as that's something that you have now really called out for, there's concerns about that. The governor has continued to pour cold water on that aspect. At the end of the day, are there any concerns with implementing that of the business community? And there's been talk of, they're going to leave Wall Street and all of this. Is that something that you've heard?
You know who I'm concerned about, Tom? I'm concerned about the mom and the father trying to make sure they can earn enough money to keep a roof over their head. Or the farmer, who doesn't even know the price for his milk, but knows that he's got to figure out, how to have health care for his family and his employees. Or, the nurse who's sending their kid to school and is dying over the fact that maybe that food insecurity, that SNAP benefit might not be there for them. Or just the young family that's trying to find a house, but can't find it because every community they're being priced out. Like, at a certain point, these are the folks, by the way, who are leaving the state. These are the individuals, folks who make between $30,000 and $60,000 a year. Those are the individuals who are saying, we can't live here anymore. The folks who are making a lot of money, they're here. And there's a lot of them here because they have the ability to be here. But the reality is we have got to get to a point where we govern for the folks who are struggling economically and governing in a fashion that isn't reinforcing that economic inequality.
Another major issue this week, the Donald Trump administration going into D.C. and taking over, if you would, law enforcement. The governor, a couple years ago now, sent National Guard into the subways. And I've heard from some in the mental health community, the Civil Liberties Union, they're like, well, the Office of Mental Health, they need to have a bigger role here. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump sent the National Guard to D.C., Governor Hochul sent the National Guard to the subways. Do you see a difference there? Do you agree with that tactic in New York City? Because I know that Donald Trump has said, he could do it in New York City if he wanted to. Obviously, there'd be barriers to that. But what do you make of that conversation?
It's an overreach.
By the governor or Donald Trump?
Both. It's an overreach, both. Two different dimensions, two different issues at play. Yeah, but the essence of what is happening is an overreach and an unnecessary mode that in many respects is more political theater than it is a practical, sustainable solution. In fact, in the case of Trump, there's no problem he's even trying to solve. So that's where it really breaks down, right? He's not even trying to solve for a problem. He's just trying to create a problem. He's manufacturing problems. So there is a distinction to be drawn in that regard, and I want to be clear on that. But in the case of Hochul, that was an overreach for a genuine problem. And you spoke to what the real needs are. And we have to build our capacity here to make sure that our system of accountability, our justice system of accountability, does not criminalize mental health, does not criminalize substance abuse. We have to build the capacity and have the housing support for that. And we're not putting in enough resources, enough investment in that. And as a result, a lot of folks are being revolving around, right, the system, in and out of the courts, in and out of dynamics that are unhealthy to them, without anybody in the system capturing them and saying, okay, let's give you the treatment you need. And the subways end up becoming a service provider, which is something that never should be the case. So we need real practical solutions that speak to this in an authentic and genuine way, that are sustainable solutions.
Do you align with this past state budget in expanding involuntary commitment?
No, I don't think we needed to expand that. I think what we needed to do was have a conversation about how we enforce the laws that we have in the most compassionate and humane way possible, and bring more accountability into the system to make sure that we're not letting individuals fall through the cracks. I would much rather focus on preventing folks from falling through the cracks and having a system that actually provides compassion and humanity on the front end before forcing folks into care.
Finally, my last question, when it comes to the redistricting, gerrymandering conversation, should this be a road the state goes down?
Let me tell you, here's what I take on this. I support what the folks in Texas are doing. I support what Newsom is doing. I think these are critical steps. What I worry about is the posture the governor is taking on what New York can do. Because I think she's signaling that we are in a position where we can make this fix before the midterms. And as far as my understanding goes, the Constitution would beg to differ, that we have to go through 2 legislative sessions to put ourselves in a position to even begin to redraw these maps, which means that would take us to 2028. So the notion that when I hear the governor say things like, we're going to war over this, I don't know if she's being direct enough with the people about what we actually can do in this moment, and being straightforward with enough to say, hey, this is an option, but let's be clear. We have limitations here on the impact of this. You know what we can do right now, Tom? You know what we can do right now? Call a special session. That she has the power to do. That she can do right now. And that, to me, is what my focus is. What can we do now to really affect people's lives and protect New Yorkers from the calamity coming out of Washington?
Antonio Delgado, as always, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.